Ashamed, the billionaire CEO chose the white mistress over his black wife until the true queen arrived. She didn't scream when she found out. She didn't throw plates or collapse against the wall. She just sat there, in his chair, in his office, holding the piece of paper that had quietly dismantled 7 years of her life. And the only sound in that entire house was the clock on his desk. Ticking, ticking, ticking. That image, a woman completely still in the ruins of everything she believed, that is where this story begins, not with the betrayal, but with the moment she decided what to do about it. Stay with me. Because what Amara does next will change everything you think you know about love, dignity, and what it truly means to be a queen. This is her story. Amara Solis had the kind of beauty that did not announce itself. It settled into a room the way good light does, gradually, warmly, until you looked up and realized everything around you had become more vivid without you noticing when it happened. At 34, she carried herself with the quiet authority of a woman who had built everything she owned from the ground up and had the calluses, invisible but real, to prove it. Her atelier sat on a quiet street in Mayfair, tucked between a private members club and an antiques dealer who had been there since before she was born. The sign above the door was simple, brushed gold letters on matte black. Solis Interiors. It did not need to shout. In certain circles of London, that name arrived before she did. Inside, the studio smelled of aged timber and bergamot and the particular kind of focus that fills a space where serious work is being done. Fabric swatches were pinned in arcs along the north wall. Architectural elevations covered 2 drafting tables. Fresh flowers, white ranunculus in a low concrete vase, sat on the reception desk where Deja, her studio manager, was already deep in the morning's correspondence before the kettle had finished boiling. It was a Tuesday in October, and the sky outside was the color of cold pewter. Amara stood at the floor-to-ceiling window with a mug of tea she had not yet drunk, looking at the street below where 2 women were laughing about something as they walked, one of them clutching a paper bag to her chest as if it held something precious. Amara watched them and felt a distant ache she could not name precisely. Lord Ashworth's office confirmed. Deja called from her desk, not looking up. Full Kensington estate, no budget ceiling. He specifically requested you personally. Good, Amara said. Good? Amara, that's the largest single commission we've ever been offered. I know, she turned from the window. Pull the file on the property and schedule a site visit for Thursday. I want to see the light in those rooms before we discuss anything. Deja stared at her for a moment with the particular expression she reserved for occasions when Amara was clearly somewhere else in her head. Are you all right? I'm fine, Amara said. I'm always fine. She picked up her tea and walked toward the drafting tables, and Deja watched her go with the quiet concern of someone who has known a person long enough to hear what they are not saying. Amara had launched Solis Interiors 6 years ago from a rented desk in a shared workspace in Clerkenwell, sketching concepts on whatever paper was available, sometimes the back of takeaway bags, sometimes the margins of receipts. She had no investors, no family money, no connections. What she had was an eye so precise it bordered on the uncanny. A refusal to accept mediocre work from herself or anyone near her, and a deep, almost cellular belief that beautiful spaces were not a luxury. They were a form of language, and she was fluent in ways most people were not. The business had grown in the way that solid things grow, slowly at first, then with gathering momentum that surprised everyone except the person doing the work. A townhouse in Belgravia, a penthouse in Chelsea, a country estate in Wiltshire whose photographs circulated through London's social circles until the phone began ringing with names that made even Deja's composure wobble slightly. And through all of it, through the 16-hour days and the contractor disputes, and the clients who changed their minds 3 weeks before completion, and the ones who cried when they walked into their transformed rooms for the first time, through all of it, Amara had come home to Dominic. Dominic Cole was the kind of man who filled a room without trying. Chief executive of Cole Capital, a private equity firm with offices in London, New York, and Singapore, he had built his business on an instinct for value, that other people could not quite articulate, but recognized immediately when they saw it working. At 39, he was lean and angular, with dark eyes that were either warm or calculating depending on what the situation required, and a charm so refined it had long since stopped feeling like performance. They had met at a gallery opening 8 years ago. Amara had been there to see the work, Dominic had been there to be seen. They had ended up in the corner of the room arguing about whether a particular piece was formally interesting or merely expensive, and 2 hours later they were the last people left, and neither of them had noticed. She had been 36. 36! She caught herself. No, she had been 26. He had been 31. And he had looked at her that night across a crowded gallery like she was the most interesting discovery he had made in years. She had believed him, completely, without reservation, the way you believe something when you are young enough and certain enough that the possibility of being wrong does not present itself as a serious candidate. Their wedding had been the most beautiful event Amara had ever designed, though she would not have said it that way to anyone. She had simply known what she wanted and built it. White ranunculus in candlelight. The ceremony held in a private garden in Richmond that they had hired for the weekend. 60 guests who actually mattered rather than 300 who were there for the photograph. She had walked down the aisle in a dress she had sketched herself and taken to a seamstress in Notting Hill who had wept twice during the fittings. And Dominic had stood at the end of that aisle and looked at her with something in his eyes that she had kept inside herself ever since, a private memory she had returned to on the nights when everything felt distant and cold, as proof that it had once been real. 7 years had taught her that memory and present tense are not the same country. The change in him had been too gradual to identify as a single moment. It had arrived the way erosion does, invisibly, incrementally, until one day you notice the coastline has shifted, and you cannot say exactly when the ground gave way. His pride in her work had been the first thing to go, not replaced by contempt exactly, but by something that felt worse than contempt because it had no edges: indifference. The particular blankness of a man who has decided that something no longer requires his attention. He had stopped asking about her projects, stopped attending the dinners she hosted for clients, stopped reaching for her in the night with the absent tenderness that had once been the last warmth of their day. Their conversations had contracted steadily until they were purely logistical. Household maintenance. Social obligations. The calendar of a shared life with no shared interior. She had tried. She wanted to be clear about that, even now, even to herself. She had tried in every way she knew how. She had suggested weekends away. Had dressed carefully for evenings at home. Had asked him questions about his work and listened to the answers with genuine attention, even when he gave them with the exhausted brevity of a man speaking to someone he has already left. She had waited and hoped and told herself it was a season that successful men move through dark periods and the person beside them simply had to hold steady. What she had not allowed herself to consider, because the considering of it would have made it real, was that his attention had not disappeared. It had simply relocated. Amara's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Working late. Don't hold dinner. 4 words. No punctuation at the end. No question about her day. The kind of message you send to a housekeeper. She set the phone face down on the drafting table and picked up a pencil and got back to work, because work had never once in her entire life let her down. Mrs. Calloway arrived at 11 for her weekly consultation, with the particular energy of a woman who treats her interior designer as both aesthetic collaborator and trusted confidant. She was 72, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, and possessed of an opinion on every subject that she delivered with the cheerful certainty of someone who has been right often enough to stop apologizing for it. "My daughter thinks the drawing-room ceiling is too dark," she announced, settling into the consultation chair with her coat still on. "I told her the drawing-room ceiling is the entire point of the drawing room. Was I wrong?" "You were completely right," Amara said. "I knew it." Mrs. Calloway studied her for a moment. "You look tired, darling." "I'm fine." "You keep saying that. It's becoming unconvincing." The older woman tilted her head slightly. "How is Dominic?" There was a pause that lasted perhaps half a second longer than it should have. "He's well," Amara said, "very busy with the New York expansion." Mrs. Calloway accepted this with a small nod that suggested she filed information carefully and retrieved it later at her own discretion. The consultation ran long, as they always did, and by the time Mrs. Calloway left, sweeping out with a wave and a promise to send her daughter to Amara directly for the lecture she clearly required. The afternoon had turned the light in the studio amber and low. Deja had gone to a site visit. The junior designers had left for the day. Amara was alone. She sat at her desk for a while without doing anything. The studio was quiet around her. Outside, London was doing what London does in the early evening in autumn, becoming briefly, achingly beautiful before the dark came down. Amara opened her laptop. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, with the careful deliberateness of someone crossing a threshold they know they cannot uncross, she typed the name of a private investigations firm that a colleague had once mentioned in passing, in the context of a client's messy divorce, in a tone that suggested the subject was not to be dwelt upon. She looked at the website for a long time without moving, then she closed the laptop and drove home. Dominic was not there. The house, a Georgian townhouse in Marylebone that they had bought together 4 years ago and that Amara had spent 6 months transforming into something that felt like a home, was quiet and warm and smelled faintly of the cedar diffuser she kept in the hallway. She walked through the room slowly, her coat still on, running her fingers along the back of the sofa she had reupholstered in deep sage velvet, past the bookshelf she had designed herself, past the kitchen where she had cooked thousands of meals for a man who now ate most of them in silence. She climbed the stairs and stood in the doorway of their bedroom for a moment, looking at the room she had made beautiful against her own growing sadness. Then she went to bed and stared at the ceiling until she heard his key in the door just after midnight. She heard him move through the house, the fridge opening and closing, the television turned on low, then off again, his footsteps on the stairs. He came into the bedroom and undressed with the quiet efficiency of someone trying not to wake a person they believe is asleep. She kept her breathing steady. He slid into bed on his side, and within minutes his breathing had slowed into sleep. Amara lay in the dark beside her husband and felt something she would not yet name but recognized as a door that had been slowly swinging open for a very long time and was now nearly wide enough to walk through. The discovery did not happen the way she might have imagined it, had she ever allowed herself to imagine it. There was no dramatic confrontation. No incriminating message left carelessly on a screen she was not meant to see. It happened on a Wednesday morning when the light was ordinary, and the city was going about its business, and Amara was simply doing what she had been doing for years, which was quietly, selflessly, making Dominic's life easier. He had asked her 2 nights before to locate a set of property documents he needed scanned and forwarded to his assistant. She had agreed without comment, because she always agreed without comment, to the small administrative requests that had somehow, over time, expanded to fill significant portions of her life. She was not resentful about this. She had stopped being resentful about it and moved on to something quieter and more permanent that she had not yet examined directly. His home office was a dark, wood-paneled room at the back of the house that smelled of leather and old paper. She crossed to his desk, found the portfolio he had described, and opened it. The document she needed was inside. And next to it, tucked between a financial report and a conference itinerary, as though it had been placed there by someone who had grown careless or was perhaps, on some level, tired of the hiding, was a folded receipt. She picked it up without suspicion. Her eyes moved across the lines of text with the automatic, unfocused scan of someone performing a routine action. The Beaumont Hotel, Deluxe Suite, 2 nights. She frowned, looked at the dates. The dates were from 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, Dominic had been in London. She was certain of this because she had made dinner on both of those evenings, a chicken dish she had tried for the first time and which he had described as good without looking up from his phone. She looked at the receipt again, read it again, the room, the dates, the minibar charges, the late checkout. Her hands did not tremble. She noticed this about herself with a distant, clinical quality. Her hands were perfectly steady. She set the receipt on the desk and opened the portfolio fully and began to look, really look, at what was inside. A graph receipt dated 6 months ago. A bracelet she had never seen on any surface of their home, had never been presented, had never arrived in tissue paper and ribbon on any morning or evening or occasion. Restaurant charges from places she recognized by reputation, intimate and expensive, dated on evenings when he had claimed long client dinners in the city. a hotel charge matching a weekend that was supposed to have been a golf retreat in Edinburgh. Amara sat down in his chair. She sat in Dominic's chair in Dominic's office, in the house she had transformed with her own hands and her own eye and her own love, and she looked at the documents spread across his desk and she understood. Not all at once. Understanding of this kind does not arrive all at once. It arrives in layers, each one darker and more specific than the last, each one asking her to absorb something she had been, until this moment, unwilling to absorb. 2 years. The receipts went back at least 2 years. She counted the dates, calculated the gaps, filled in the evenings and weekends and business trips against the timeline of their marriage, and watched the pattern assemble itself with the terrible clarity of something that had always been there, waiting for her to look. She sat in that chair for a very long time. Then her phone buzzed with a message from Deja. The Pemberton family had inquired about commissioning her for their estate in Scotland. They had said, according to Deja's message, that she was the only designer in England they trusted for a project of that scale. Amara read the message, set the phone down, carefully replaced the documents exactly as she had found them, stood up, smoothed the front of her jacket, picked up the property documents she had come for, walked out of the office, pulled the door closed. She scanned and sent the documents. Then she drove to the atelier and spent the next 9 hours doing the best work of her life. This is what strength looks like from the outside. Calm, controlled, professional. But if you had been close enough to see her eyes that day, you would have noticed something moving in their depths that had no name yet, but was gathering shape with every passing hour. If this story is already gripping you, stay with it, because we are only at the beginning of what Amara is about to discover, and I promise you, what happens next will stop your breath. 4 days after the receipts, the phone call happened. Amara came home at 7 to find Dominic's car in the drive. She let herself in quietly, the way she had begun to let herself into rooms where he was present, with a particular low-key alertness she had not consciously developed but had come to rely on. He was in the kitchen. His back was to her. He was standing at the window that looked out over the small garden she had planted herself. In their first year in the house, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice carrying the warm, unhurried quality of a man in conversation with someone he wanted to please. "I know, sweetheart, I know. Next week will be perfect. I promise you that." The word landed in Amara's chest like a stone dropped into still water. Sweetheart. She stood completely still in the doorway and let it land and felt the rings expanding outward from the point of impact. When was the last time he had called her sweetheart? She tried to remember and could not. She could not locate a single recent instance of any endearment directed at her. She had become, without noticing the precise moment of the transition, simply Amara, her own name delivered across the breakfast table with the mild neutrality of a statement of fact. Dominic turned and saw her. Something moved swiftly across his face. Surprise, then guilt, then the mask, smooth and practiced, the one she had been looking at for 2 years without fully seeing what it was covering. "I have to go," he said into the phone. "Conference call?" Amara asked. "Client in New York. You know how they get." He set the phone face down on the counter. "Good day." "Productive," she said. They made dinner together in the careful, wordless choreography of people who have shared a kitchen for years and have nothing left to say in it. Amara chopped vegetables with a steady hand and watched her husband from the corner of her eye and felt something crystallizing inside her that was not anger yet, not quite, but was anger's predecessor. The cold, clear, unalterable knowledge that you have been lied to by the one person in the world whose honesty you had a right to assume. Over dinner, he talked about a potential acquisition in Frankfurt. She asked questions and listened to the answers and said the appropriate things at the appropriate moments, and he did not once look at her with the directness of someone who is genuinely interested in the person across from him. He retired to his office after dinner. She went upstairs and ran a bath and sat in the water until it went cold, and by the time she climbed out, she had made a decision. Harriet Vane's office was in a clean, glass-fronted building 5 minutes from Canary Wharf. The reception area was spare and deliberate. No soft lighting, no attempt at comfort. This was a place where people came to hear the truth, and the decor seemed to understand that coziness would be an insult to that purpose. Harriet herself was a woman in her mid-40s with silver-streaked hair cut close and the kind of eyes that cataloged information so efficiently you barely noticed it happening. She shook Amara's hand with a businesslike warmth and gestured to a chair and opened her notebook and waited. "I believe my husband is having an affair," Amara said. "I need to know who she is, how long it has been going on, and the extent of it." "What has led you to this conclusion?" Amara detailed the receipts, the hotel charges, the phone call and the word she had heard, the pattern of late nights and altered behavior. She spoke without emotion, not because she had none, but because she had arranged it carefully to one side for the duration of this conversation. Harriet took notes and asked clarifying questions with the focused efficiency of someone assembling a structure from components that had been provided out of sequence. "How long do you suspect this has been going on?" Harriet asked. "The receipts go back 2 years," Amara said, "but I think it may be longer." The word settled between them. 2 years. The number had a weight to it that was different from abstraction. 2 years of waking beside a man whose mind was somewhere else. 2 years of telling herself the distance was work, was stress, was the particular solitude of ambitious people. 2 years of making herself smaller and quieter and less demanding, in the belief that her needs were the problem. "I'll need financial records, phone billing history, and his travel schedule for the past 18 months, Harriet said. "The more you can provide, the faster and more complete the picture will be." "I can have everything you need within 48 hours, Amara said. She stood, straightened her coat, looked at Harriet directly. "I need you to understand something," she said quietly. "I am not doing this to punish him. I am doing this because I have spent 2 years wondering if I was imagining things, and I need to know if I was wrong." Harriet held her gaze. "You weren't wrong," she said simply. "People who are imagining things don't hire investigators. They keep hoping." Amara nodded once, walked out into the cold London morning, and stood on the pavement for a moment with her face tipped slightly upward, the sky the same heavy pewter it had been all week, and breathed. Then she went to work, because the studio needed her and her clients needed her, and her work had always been the thing that reminded her, on the days when everything else felt unstable, of who she actually was. The investigation took 6 days. Amara moved through those 6 days with a surface composure that she was privately astonished by. She completed the Pemberton Commission proposal. She presented the Ashworth estate concept to Lord Ashworth's representative and watched the woman's face change as she moved through the mood boards, the particular expression of someone encountering something that exceeds their expectation. She mentored her junior designers through a difficult client revision without raising her voice once. And every evening she drove home and sat across from Dominic and ate dinner and listened to his conversation and answered when he spoke to her, and the whole time something inside her was very still and very watchful, the way water is still before it reaches a fall. Harriet called on the morning of the 6th day. "Can you come in this afternoon?" The office felt smaller this time. The manila envelope on the desk between them was thicker than Amara had expected. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she reached forward and opened it. "Her name is Petra Langford," Harriet said. Her voice was measured and steady, the voice of someone who respects the gravity of what they are delivering. "She's 26. She works in wealth management at a boutique firm in the city. Her background is old money. Her father is a significant figure in certain financial circles. She is blonde. She moves in the same social world as your husband, though at the periphery of it." Amara said nothing. She looked at the first page of the report without reading it, her eyes moving across the text without taking it in, waiting. "They have been meeting primarily at the Beaumont and at her apartment in Chelsea. There is also a property in the Cotswolds they have used twice. According to the financial records, your husband has been actively supplementing her lifestyle, her rent, her travel, jewelry and clothing purchases, membership fees at several private establishments. This is not a casual arrangement." Harriet slid 3 photographs across the desk. Amara looked at them. The first photograph was taken on a street she recognized as somewhere in Belgravia. Dominic and a young woman walking side by side, close enough that their arms were touching. The woman was tall and fair, laughing at something, her head tilted toward him with the relaxed ease of someone who has long since stopped performing and started simply being. Dominic was looking at her with an expression Amara recognized because she had a memory of it, from 8 years ago, at a gallery, in a corner of the room, the expression of a man who has discovered something he finds remarkable. The second photograph was at a restaurant table, intimate, candlelit. Dominic leaning forward, his forearms on the table, his entire body oriented toward her with an attention and focus that Amara had been trying to recreate in her own home for 2 years. She made herself look at the third photograph, Petra's left hand, raised to push her hair back, the gesture natural and unconsidered, not performed. On her ring finger, catching the light, a diamond that Amara had never seen in any drawer or safe or box in their house. "The ring," Amara said. Her voice was completely steady. She noted this about herself again from a distance. "When was it purchased?" 3 weeks ago, Harriet said, according to the credit card records. There was a silence that lasted a long time. "There is one more thing," Harriet said. "I want you to be prepared." She withdrew a final page from the envelope. "They have been viewing properties together, high-end residential, primarily in Notting Hill and Holland Park. 3 viewings in the past 2 months. The estate agent records describe them as a couple with a flexible timeline and a significant budget." Amara looked at the page. The addresses, the dates, the estate agent's notes. Her husband was not having an affair. Her husband was building a new life. He had been building it, quietly and systematically, for at least 2 years, while she slept beside him and cooked in his kitchen and designed his home, and told herself the distance between them was something she could close if she found the right approach. "Mrs. Cole," Harriet said quietly, "are you all right?" "Please send me your final invoice," Amara said, "and thank you for being thorough." She gathered the photographs and the documents and placed them with absolute precision back into the envelope. She stood, buttoned her coat, looked at Harriet with the steady gaze of a woman who has found the floor and is standing on it. She walked to the door. "Mrs. Cole," Harriet said once more. Amara paused. "You asked me, the first time you came in, whether you were wrong for thinking something was off." Harriet looked at her with the directness of earned respect. "You are not wrong. You were never wrong." Amara absorbed this, nodded once, walked out. The drive home was the longest and the shortest she had ever made. She did not cry. She drove through London in the gray afternoon light with the envelope on the passenger seat and felt the particular quality of a silence that follows the last lie being removed from the room. Not peace, not yet, but the precondition of peace, the clearing away. She pulled into their driveway and sat with the engine off for a moment. The house looked exactly as it always did. Beautiful. Still, designed with love by a woman who had believed she was building a home that would hold 2 people for a lifetime. She picked up the envelope and went inside. He was not home yet. She went to the kitchen and sat at the table they had bought together at an antique market in Bath during their 2nd year of marriage, laughing over who would carry it to the car, and she placed the envelope in front of her and folded her hands over it and waited. She waited for 2 hours. She heard the door, the sound of his keys in the bowl, his footsteps on the hallway floor she had tiled herself. And then Dominic walked into the kitchen and stopped. He saw her face first, then the envelope. His eyes moved between the two, and she watched him, and she could see, in the particular set of his jaw, and the way his shoulders shifted almost imperceptibly downward, the exact moment when he understood that the architecture of his 2-year deception had reached its end. He sat down across from her, which told her something. He did not try to leave the room or manufacture an alternative narrative. He simply sat down and looked at her, and for perhaps the first time in 2 years he was actually present. "How long have you known?" he asked. "I've suspected for a long time," Amara said. "I confirmed it 6 days ago." He nodded slowly, looked at the envelope. "Her name is Petra," Amara said. 26. Wealth management. "You've been viewing properties with her in Notting Hill." She paused. "You bought her a ring 3 weeks ago." The silence that followed this was the longest silence she had ever sat inside. "Amara," he said. His voice had a quality she had not heard from him in years. Something stripped back and unperformed. "I don't know how to—" "Don't," she said, not unkindly, simply clearly. "Don't explain it or frame it." I don't need your narration of what happened. I can read. He looked at his hands. What I need to understand, Amara said carefully, is one thing, not why. I think I know why, or at least I know enough of it to stop needing more. What I need to understand is whether there was ever a point at which you intended to tell me, or whether you were simply going to finish building your new life and leave me to understand from the empty wardrobe. Dominic was quiet for a very long time. I don't have a good answer to that, he said finally. I know, she said. That's the answer. She stood. The movement was unhurried. She straightened the edge of the envelope against the table surface, with the precision of someone who arranges things well. She looked at her husband. This man she had loved without reservation, had built a life alongside, had believed in completely, and she felt something that surprised her. Not hatred, not the clean hot blade of pure rage, something older and sadder and more permanent than either. She felt sorry for him. She felt the sorrow of someone witnessing another person's failure to become who they could have been. I want a divorce, she said. I'd like you out of the house by the end of the week. My solicitor will call your office Monday morning. Amara, his voice caught. Can we not? No. The word was quiet and absolute. We are done, Dominic. Not because I stopped loving you. I'm not certain I have. But because I am no longer willing to live in a house where I am the only person who considers us worth saving. She walked out of the kitchen, up the stairs, into the room she had made beautiful against her own longing. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands for a long moment. Then, slowly, she smiled. Not a happy smile, not yet, but the smile of a woman who has been underwater for 2 years and has just broken the surface and taken her first real breath. Outside the window, London was going dark, the city lights beginning to surface through the dusk, and Amara sat in the room she would soon redecorate completely, in colors that were entirely her own, and she understood that the story she had been living was not ending. It was finally, after all this time, beginning. The morning arrived with the kind of silence that felt like a warning. Isabel woke before dawn, her body still programmed for survival, for vigilance, for the constant awareness that safety was temporary. The twins were still asleep, their small bodies curled together in the massive bed, looking impossibly small against all that luxury. She moved quietly through the guest suite, gathering their things, the few items they'd brought, the coats Alexander had given them. She folded everything with careful precision, her movements automatic, practiced. This was what she knew how to do. Leave before things got complicated, before staying became dangerous. But then Daniel coughed in his sleep, that same rattling sound, and Isabel's hand stilled on the coat she was folding. 2 days. She'd promised 2 days. In the kitchen, Alexander was already awake. He'd been awake most of the night, sitting in his study, making calls, sending encrypted emails, building a strategy. If his mother wanted war, he'd give her war. But this time, he wouldn't lose. He heard Isabel moving in the guest suite, heard the quiet sounds of someone preparing to run. He poured 2 cups of coffee and waited. When Isabel emerged, her hair pulled back, her face carefully neutral, Alexander was sitting at the kitchen counter. He slid one of the coffee cups toward her. You're up early. His tone was conversational, casual, like he didn't notice she'd been packing. Isabel took the coffee but didn't sit. Couldn't sleep. Alexander nodded, took a sip of his own coffee. I've been thinking about what you said last night, about my mother. Isabel's grip tightened on her cup. Alexander? No, listen, you were right. She won't stop. She'll keep coming. She'll use every resource, every connection, every dirty trick she knows. And she knows a lot of them. Isabel set down her cup. Then you understand why we need to leave. Alexander stood, moved around the counter until he was facing her directly. I understand why you think you need to leave, but running didn't work 5 years ago. It just delayed this conversation, and I'm not interested in delaying anymore. What are you saying? I'm saying we get ahead of her. We control the narrative before she can spin it. We go public. Isabel's eyes went wide. You've lost your mind. Maybe, but I've spent 5 years living a half-life, pretending I didn't care that you were gone, Pretending it didn't destroy me. I'm done pretending. He took a step closer. I want to claim my children, publicly, legally. I want the world to know they're mine. And I want everyone to know exactly what my mother did to keep us apart. That will ruin you. Alexander's laugh was bitter. I run a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure company. My reputation is built on integrity and transparency. You know what ruins that? Lies, secrets, the things we hide. But the truth? The truth is I fell in love with an incredible woman. She got pregnant. My mother paid her to disappear. And I spent 5 years not knowing I had children. That's not a scandal, that's a tragedy. And people understand tragedy. Isabel shook her head, backing away. You don't know what you're asking. I'm not asking. I'm telling you what I'm going to do, whether you help me or not. The words hung between them, not a threat, a declaration. Before Isabel could respond, her phone rang. The sound was jarring in the quiet apartment. She pulled it from her pocket, looked at the screen. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. Hello? The voice on the other end was smooth, professional, male. Ms. Torres, my name is Lawrence Chen. I'm an attorney, representing the Graves family. I believe we should talk. Isabel's face went pale. Her eyes shot to Alexander. How did you get this number? Lawrence Chen's tone didn't change. Calm, controlled, utterly confident. Ms. Torres, I think you know that's not the relevant question. The relevant question is what happens next. And I'd like to discuss that with you. Privately. Today. There's a cafe on Madison and 63rd. I'll be there at 10 a.m. I suggest you come alone. The line went dead. Isabel lowered the phone, her hand trembling slightly. Alexander was already moving toward her. Who was that? Isabel's voice was hollow. Lawrence Chen. Your mother's attorney. He wants to meet. Alexander's expression darkened. You're not going. I have to. No, you don't. Whatever he's going to offer, whatever threats he's going to make, we already know the playbook. Isabel looked at him, her eyes filled with something that looked like resignation. Which is exactly why I need to hear it. I need to know what she's planning, what she's willing to do. Because if we're really going to fight this, I need to know what we're up against. Then I'm coming with you. No. Isabel's voice was firm. If you come, he won't talk. He'll just walk away and we'll have learned nothing. I need to do this alone. Alexander wanted to argue. Every instinct in him screamed to protect her, to stand between her and whatever his mother had planned. But he also knew she was right. Lawrence Chen was many things, but he was also a strategist. And strategists didn't reveal their plans when the opposition was listening. Fine, but you wear a wire. Audio recording. Everything he says, I hear. Isabel started to protest. Alexander cut her off. Non-negotiable. You want to go alone? Fine. But I'm not letting you walk into that meeting completely unprotected. After a long moment, Isabel nodded. Okay. 2 hours later, Isabel sat in a corner booth at a cafe that was trying very hard to look European and expensive. The kind of place that charged $12 for coffee and called it artisanal. Lawrence Chen was already there when she arrived, sitting with his back to the wall, a perfect view of the entrance. He was exactly what she expected. Mid-50s, immaculately dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her rent used to be, with silver hair and the kind of face that had learned to show only what he wanted you to see. He stood when she approached, extended his hand. Miss Torres, thank you for coming. His handshake was brief, professional. Isabel sat across from him, her coat still on, her purse in her lap. Everything about her body language said she wasn't staying long. Lawrence Chen sat back down, signaled to a waiter, ordered 2 cappuccinos without asking what Isabel wanted. Once the waiter left, Chen folded his hands on the table and smiled. It was the smile of a man who held all the cards and knew it. I'll be direct. Mrs. Graves is concerned about the current situation, your return to New York, your contact with her son, the children. Isabel's voice was steady. They're his children. He has a right to know them. Chen's smile didn't waver. Perhaps. But rights are complicated things, Miss Torres, especially when they conflict with other interests. Mrs. Graves has built something remarkable over the past 40 years. A legacy. An empire. She's not willing to see that compromised. I'm not trying to compromise anything. I'm just trying to take care of my children. Of course. And Mrs. Graves understands that, which is why she's prepared to be quite generous. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. He slid it across the table. Inside, you'll find a contract. Mrs. Graves is offering you $2 million. In exchange, you agree to relocate, somewhere comfortable, California perhaps, or abroad, if you prefer. You'll sign over any parental claims to Alexander Graves. You'll agree to a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, and you'll ensure that your children have no contact with the Graves family. Isabel stared at the folder like it was a snake. You want me to sell my children? Chen's expression didn't change. I want you to accept a generous settlement that ensures your children's financial security while protecting a family business that employs 15,000 people worldwide. Surely you can see the wisdom in that. Isabel's hands clenched into fists under the table. And if I refuse? Chen's smile finally faded. His voice dropped, becoming colder, harder. Then things become unpleasant. We'll start by questioning your fitness as a mother, a woman who's been evicted twice in 5 years, who's moved her children between 6 different addresses, who was recently found homeless on a park bench in the middle of winter. Those were lies mixed with just enough truth to be dangerous. We'll petition for emergency custody based on neglect. We'll tie you up in court for years. Legal fees will destroy you. You'll lose your children anyway, but instead of $2 million, you'll have nothing. You'll be alone, and you'll have no one to blame but yourself. The cafe suddenly felt very cold. Isabel leaned forward, her voice low but fierce. You think I'm going to let you threaten me after what your client already did to me? Chen leaned back, completely unruffled. I'm not threatening you, Miss Torres. I'm explaining reality. Mrs. Graves has unlimited resources. You have none. This is a fight you cannot win. So I'm offering you a way out, a way that lets you keep your dignity and gives your children a stable future. I suggest you take it. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket. You have 48 hours to decide. After that, the offer is withdrawn and we proceed with litigation. He placed a business card on the table. Call me when you're ready to be reasonable. Then he walked out, leaving Isabel sitting alone with a folder full of poison and a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. 3 blocks away, in his penthouse, Alexander listened to every word through the wireless earpiece connected to the recording device Isabel wore. His hands were clenched so tightly, his knuckles had gone white. His jaw was set in a way that would have terrified anyone who knew him well. When Chen walked out and the recording went silent except for Isabel's breathing, Alexander yanked out the earpiece and threw it across the room. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. It was answered on the first ring. Marissa Grant speaking. Alexander's voice was cold, controlled fury. I need you at my office in 1 hour. Bring everything you have on hostile board takeovers and public whistleblowing. We're going to war. There was a brief pause. Then Marissa's voice came back, sharper, more focused. Against who? My mother. Another pause, longer this time. I'll be there in 30 minutes. When Isabel returned to the penthouse, Alexander was waiting in the living room. The folder Chen had given her was still in her hands. She set it on the coffee table like it was contaminated. Alexander looked at her, his expression carefully neutral. You okay? Isabel laughed, but there was no humor in it. Define okay. She sat down heavily on the sofa. $2 million. That's what I'm worth. That's what she thinks it costs to make me disappear. Alexander sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. You're not taking it. It wasn't a question. Isabel looked at him. What if I should? What if that's the smart play? Take the money, move somewhere quiet, raise my kids without this hanging over us? Alexander's voice was gentle but firm. You don't believe that. If you did, you would have taken the first 50,000 and never looked back. But you didn't. You kept fighting. You kept surviving. Because you're not someone who runs when things get hard. I ran from you. The words were quiet, painful. Alexander shook his head. No, you were forced out. There's a difference. He reached over and took her hand. She didn't pull away. We fight this. Together, we expose what she did. We take away her power by taking away her secrets. And if we lose, then we lose fighting. But at least our children will know we tried. They'll know we didn't just give up and let someone buy us off. Isabel looked down at their joined hands. I'm scared. So am I. His honesty surprised her. She looked up, met his eyes. But I'm more scared of spending another 5 years wondering what if. What if I'd fought harder? What if I'd trusted you to handle the truth? What if I'd been braver? He squeezed her hand. I'm done with what ifs. I want what is. Before Isabel could respond, there was a knock at the door. Alexander stood, checked the security monitor. Marissa Grant stood in the hallway, carrying a leather briefcase and looking like she was ready for battle. Alexander opened the door. That was fast. Marissa walked in, her eyes immediately going to Isabel. You must be the woman who's about to help me take down Victoria Graves. I'm Marissa Grant, Alexander's attorney, and as of 30 minutes ago, yours too if you'll have me. She set her briefcase on the dining table, opened it, and pulled out a legal pad covered in notes. I've been wanting to go after Victoria for years. She's corrupt, manipulative, and has been using the Graves Company as her personal piggy bank for the last decade. But she's also smart and well protected. Until now. She looked between Alexander and Isabel. A secret child, a payoff, documented threats. This is exactly the kind of human story that breaks through corporate armor, but we need to be strategic. We need to control how this comes out. How? Isabel's voice was hesitant. Marissa sat down, gestured for them to join her. We go public, but we do it right. First, Alexander, you call an emergency board meeting. You tell them everything. You present evidence of Victoria's financial improprieties. You make it clear that her actions were personal, vindictive, and potentially illegal. And me? Isabel asked. Marissa turned to her. You do a press conference. You tell your story, all of it. The relationship, the pregnancy, the payoff, the threats. You make yourself sympathetic. You make Victoria the villain, which, let's be honest, won't be hard. Isabel's face went pale. I can't stand in front of cameras and talk about this. Yes, you can, because if you don't, Victoria will craft her own narrative. She'll paint you as a gold digger, a manipulator, someone who trapped her son and is now trying to extort the family. She'll destroy your reputation before you even know what hit you. Marissa's voice softened slightly. I know it's terrifying, but the truth is your best weapon, and I'll help you every step of the way. Isabel looked at Alexander. He nodded slowly. She's right. We control the story, or the story controls us. Isabel took a deep breath, then another. Finally, she nodded. Okay, what do we do first? Marissa smiled. It was the smile of a lawyer who'd just been handed a winning case. First, we document everything, every text, every email, every bank statement. We build an airtight case. Then we move fast before Victoria can mount a defense. She looked at Alexander. Can you get me access to board meeting minutes from the last 5 years? Alexander nodded. I can get you everything. Good, because we're going to need it. The next 48 hours were a blur. Alexander pulled files, emails, financial records. Isabel gave a 5-hour deposition to Marissa, recounting every detail of her relationship with Alexander, the threats from Victoria, the money, the years in hiding. The twins stayed with a trusted friend of Marissa's, a grandmother type who ran a small daycare and asked no questions. It killed Isabel to be separated from them, but she knew they couldn't be part of this. Not yet. Not until it was safe. On the second night, as Isabel and Alexander sat in his study reviewing documents, Isabel's phone rang. Unknown number again. She answered, her voice wary. Hello? Miss Torres, it's Lawrence Chen. I'm calling to see if you've made a decision. Isabel looked at Alexander. He nodded, pressed record on the device they'd set up. I have. Her voice was steady. Excellent. I'll send a courier for the signed contracts tomorrow morning. No. Isabel's voice was clear, firm. I'm not taking the money, I'm not leaving, and I'm not giving up my rights to my children. Tell Mrs. Graves that if she wants a fight, she'll get one. But this time, it won't be in the shadows. It'll be in broad daylight where everyone can see exactly what kind of person she is. There was a long pause on the other end. Miss Torres, I strongly advise you to reconsider. I've done nothing but reconsider for 5 years. I'm done. Tell your client to expect a call from my attorney. Her name is Marissa Grant. I'm sure Victoria knows her." Isabel hung up. Alexander looked at her, something like pride in his eyes. That was perfect. Isabel's hands were shaking. She set the phone down carefully. "I think I'm going to be sick." Alexander stood, moved to her side. "You're going to be fine. We're going to be fine." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've been playing corporate chess my entire life. And Victoria taught me everything I know, which means I know exactly how she thinks. And I know her weaknesses." "What weaknesses?" "She seems pretty invincible to me." Alexander's smile was cold. "Arrogance. She thinks she's untouchable, that nobody would dare challenge her. That's going to be her downfall." The next morning, Alexander walked into the Graves Global headquarters for an emergency board meeting he'd called without Victoria's knowledge. The boardroom was already full when he arrived. 12 board members, all powerful, all connected, all loyal to Victoria in varying degrees. Victoria herself sat at the head of the table, her expression calm, but her eyes were sharp. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know what. Alexander took his seat at the opposite end of the table. "Thank you all for coming on short notice." His voice was steady, professional. Victoria's smile was thin. "This is highly irregular, Alexander. Emergency meetings require board approval. Which is why I'm grateful you're all here to approve it retroactively." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of folders. "I've called this meeting because I've discovered some disturbing irregularities in our financial records. Specifically, unauthorized transfers from company accounts to personal accounts. Payments made to third parties without board approval. And evidence of funds being used for personal matters rather than company business." He began distributing the folders. Victoria's expression didn't change, but her knuckles went white where they gripped her pen. "Each of you has a copy of the documentation. I think you'll find it quite illuminating." The board members opened their folders. Alexander watched their faces change as they read, confusion, then concern, then anger. One of the older board members, a man named Richard Castellano, looked up. "These payments, Victoria, can you explain them?" Victoria's voice was calm, but there was an edge underneath. "Those are operational expenses, consulting fees, standard business practice." Alexander leaned forward. "Consulting fees paid to a shell corporation that happens to be owned by your personal attorney? Payments that total over $3 million in the last 2 years alone?" He pulled out another document. "And this payment? $50,000, labeled as settlement. Final. Care to explain who is being settled and why company funds were used?" Victoria's eyes went ice cold. "That was a personnel matter. Confidential." Alexander's voice dropped, became harder. "It was a payoff. To silence a woman who was pregnant with my children. A woman you threatened and coerced into leaving New York. That's not a personnel matter, that's a crime." The room exploded, board members talking over each other. Demands for explanation, calls for investigation. Victoria stood, her voice cutting through the chaos. "This is a personal vendetta. My son is trying to stage a coup because I refuse to accept his poor judgment in romantic partners." Alexander stood as well. "This isn't about romance. This is about you using company resources for personal vendettas. This is about you breaking fiduciary duty. This is about corruption." He looked around the table. "I'm calling for a vote of no confidence. I'm asking this board to suspend Victoria Graves from all company operations pending a full external audit." The room went silent. Victoria's laugh was bitter. "You don't have the votes. These people are loyal to me." Alexander met her eyes. "These people are loyal to the company, and when they see what you've done, they'll do what's right." Richard Castellano cleared his throat. "I move to second the vote of no confidence." Another board member raised her hand. "I third the motion." Victoria's face went pale. The vote was called, 9-3. Victoria was suspended. She stood there for a long moment, staring at her son with something that looked like hatred and heartbreak all at once. Then she gathered her things and walked out without a word. That same afternoon, 3 blocks away, Isabel stood in front of a wall of microphones in a press conference room that Marissa had arranged. The twins were still safely away. This moment was Isabel's alone. The room was packed, reporters from every major outlet, cameras pointed at her like weapons. The lights were hot, blinding. Marissa stood beside her, a steady presence. Isabel took a breath and began. Ashamed, the billionaire CEO chose the white mistress over his black wife until the true queen arrived. Part 2. There is a particular kind of mourning that follows the end of something. It does not feel like grief, though grief is present. It does not feel like relief, though relief is there too. It feels like standing in a room where all the furniture has been removed and realizing, for the first time, how much space you actually have. Amara woke on the first morning after Dominic left and lay still for a long moment, listening to the house. It was quiet in a way it had never quite been when he was in it, not empty, just spacious, as though the rooms had exhaled. She got up, made coffee, stood at the kitchen window in the pale early light, and looked at the garden she had planted in their first year, the small, disciplined beds of lavender and rosemary that had survived every season since, and she thought, with a clarity that surprised her, not about what she had lost. She thought about what she was going to build next. The divorce was handled with the brisk efficiency of two people who had, in the end, enough mutual respect and enough shared exhaustion to avoid turning their unraveling into a performance. Dominic kept Cole Capital and the investment portfolio he had built before they met. Amara kept the Marylebone house, half of their joint assets, and the entirety of a future that was now, for the first time in 7 years, entirely her own to design. Her solicitor, a composed woman named Frances, who had seen every variety of marital dissolution and maintained her equanimity through all of them, told Amara on the morning the papers were signed that she had conducted herself with more dignity than anyone she had represented in 20 years of family law. Amara accepted this, thanked her, walked out into a February morning that was cold and bright and crackling with the particular energy of a city that does not pause for personal reckonings, and stood on the pavement for a moment with her face tilted up and her eyes closed and felt the air move across her skin. Then she went to work. What happened to Solis Interiors in the 12 months that followed the divorce was the kind of growth that surprises everyone except the person whose suppressed energy is suddenly redirected into their work with nothing left competing for it. Amara threw herself into the studio with a focus so complete and so luminous that her team, who had always admired her, began to watch her with something closer to awe. The Ashworth Commission launched to considerable attention. 3 architectural publications ran features on the Kensington estate, each one using photographs that Amara had art-directed herself, understanding that the way a space is documented is as much a part of its story as the space itself. The inquiries that followed were relentless. A hotel group in Edinburgh, a developer building a residential tower in 9 Elms who wanted interiors that would justify the price point, a private client in Geneva who had seen the Ashworth photographs and called within 48 hours of their publication. Deja hired 2 new junior designers and was lobbying hard for a third. The atelier's waiting list stretched to 8 months. Amara began the search for a second studio space in a quiet street off Marylebone High Street, close enough to the original atelier that the two could operate as a coherent whole, large enough that she could finally give her team the room they needed to do the work properly. Dominic had once told her, in the flat, exhausted tone he had used in the later years of their marriage when he was technically present but pointing towards somewhere else, that she should focus on perfecting her current operation before expanding. She had absorbed this and filed it, and allowed it to become part of the internal architecture of her restraint. She thought about this on the day she signed the lease on the second space. She did not think about it with bitterness. She thought about it the way you think about a door that was closed and is now open, with the mild, almost affectionate wonder of someone who cannot quite believe they waited so long to try the handle. She redecorated the Marylebone house from the ground up. This was not an act of erasure, though people who did not know her well might have assumed that. It was an act of reclamation. She painted the drawing room walls in a deep, saturated green that she had always wanted and had held back from because it was too much, too bold, too specifically herself in a space that was meant to accommodate 2 people's sensibilities. She hung paintings she had always loved in rooms where they had never been allowed to live. She stripped the bedroom of its careful, neutral palette and rebuilt it in colors that made her feel warm and contained, and completely, unapologetically herself. The house became, for the first time, a home, her home, not the stage set of a marriage, not the backdrop for someone else's life, hers. Mrs. Calloway noticed immediately. "You've done something to yourself," the older woman announced during her first consultation of the new year, narrowing her eyes at Amara with the focused assessment of someone examining a room that has been rearranged. "You look different. You look like you again." "I feel like me again," Amara said. "Marriage can do terrible things to a person's sense of themselves." Mrs. Calloway said this with the authority of someone speaking from experience. "The good ones expand you. The wrong ones compress you until you forget what your actual shape is." She paused. "You were compressed, darling. It was painful to watch." "You never said anything." "It wasn't my place to say anything. It was my place to wait." The older woman smiled with the warmth of genuine fondness. "And here you are." Here she was. She had begun taking solo trips on the weekends she was not working, which were not many but were sacred. Paris in March, staying in a small hotel near the Marais where she walked for hours and ate alone at restaurant tables with a book she was actually reading, and felt the particular pleasure of a woman who is entirely accountable to herself, and finding it, against every cultural expectation, a profound relief. Florence in April, where she stood in front of a Caravaggio for 40 minutes and felt the kind of mood that requires no company. Lisbon in May, where she drank wine on a terrace overlooking the river and wrote in a notebook she had bought specifically for the trip and had not felt self-conscious about for a single moment. She was not lonely on these trips. This surprised her until she understood that she had been lonely for years inside her marriage in a way that aloneness simply could not replicate. Loneliness, she had learned, is not the absence of people. It is the presence of the wrong ones. She was learning, slowly and with genuine pleasure, to enjoy her own company. It was Deja who first mentioned Julian Reyes. This happened on a Tuesday in June, 5 months after the divorce was finalized, on a morning when the light in the atelier was the particular gold of early summer, and the studio was full of the productive quiet of people absorbed in good work. "There's a call for you," Deja said, appearing at the door of Amara's office with a specific quality of studied casualness that did not fool anyone who knew her. "An architect, Julian Reyes. He's been commissioned to design the new Southwark Cultural Center, the one the mayor's office has been discussing for 2 years. He wants to talk about a collaboration on the interior spaces." She paused. "He specifically requested you." "Call him back and schedule a meeting for this week," Amara said, without looking up from the elevation she was studying. "I already did," Deja said. "Thursday at 2. He also—" Another pause, fractionally longer than the first. "He asked if you might have time for coffee beforehand." He said professional coffee, then sort of laughed at himself and said he meant it professionally. "But if you had time for actual coffee, that would also be—" Deja stopped. "He was endearing about it." Amara looked up. Deja's expression was that of a person attempting neutrality and achieving the opposite. "What does he look like?" Amara asked. The smile that broke across Deja's face was enormous and immediate. "I'll let you form your own assessment," she said, and retreated from the doorway before Amara could ask anything further. Julian Reyes arrived on Thursday at 9 minutes to 2, which told Amara something before she had registered anything else about him. A person who arrives 9 minutes early to a professional meeting either takes the meeting seriously or takes punctuality seriously, and in her experience, the two qualities tended to arrive together. She was at her drafting table when Deja showed him in, and she took a moment before looking up, finishing the note she was making, because she had learned a long time ago that the way you receive a person in your own space communicates something about how you regard yourself in relation to them. When she did look up, she found a man who was not, in the conventional sense, the most immediately striking person she had ever seen in a room. He was tall, with the kind of build that suggested he spent time on things that required physical engagement rather than time in a gym mirror. Dark eyes beneath strong brows, a jaw that had opinions. His suit was well made and unremarkable, the choice of someone who dresses to function rather than to be noticed. But he was standing in the middle of her studio, looking at the material sample wall, with an expression of such genuine, unperformed attention that something in Amara's chest registered it before her brain had finished its assessment. He was not assessing her space, he was reading it, the way you read something you find genuinely interesting. He turned when he heard her approach, and his face arranged itself into a smile that arrived without calculation, the kind that begins in the eyes before it reaches anything else. "Miss Solis." His voice carried the faint trace of an accent she could not immediately place. "Thank you for seeing me. I was early. I hope that's all right." "Early is fine," she said. "What were you looking at?" He turned back to the sample wall. "The way you've sequenced these," he said, his hand moving along the arc of fabric swatches and material samples without touching them. "It's not alphabetical and it's not by project. It's by emotional register." He glanced at her. "Warm materials toward the left, moving through to cooler and more austere toward the right. It's how a composer might organize a score." Amara looked at him. "I'm Julian," he said. "I know," she said. "Sit down." The professional conversation was exceptional. Julian walked her through the Cultural Center Commission with the precision and depth of someone who had been thinking about a project for a long time and had the intelligence to have arrived somewhere interesting. The building itself was an ambitious structure of glass and reclaimed Portland stone, designed to sit on a prominent South Bank site where 3 generations of Londoners had watched an unloved concrete block do nothing in particular for the city's skyline. He wanted the interior to match the emotional ambition of the building's exterior. Not just beautiful, he said, not just functional. He wanted spaces that made people feel something specific. Arrival, possibility, the particular quality of a room that invites you to become more present in it. "Why me?" Amara asked. He considered this with a seriousness that told her he had anticipated the question and had not prepared a polished answer for it, which was itself an answer. "I spent 2 days last month visiting your completed projects," he said. "Every space I could access, 6 in total." She looked at him. "That's unusual." "I believe in understanding the work before approaching the person," he said simply. "And your work is?" "It does something I find very difficult to articulate technically, which is unusual for me because I am generally quite comfortable with technical articulation." He paused. "Your spaces don't just look beautiful. They make people feel they have arrived somewhere. That is the rarest possible quality in an interior. It's what this building needs." There was a silence between them that had a specific temperature, not uncomfortable, the opposite of uncomfortable, the kind of silence that only exists between 2 people who are both paying full attention. "Tell me about the atrium," Amara said. He spread the drawings across her consultation table, and they bent over them together, and something in the quality of the afternoon changed, without either of them moving to change it, the way the light shifts when a cloud passes, and everything becomes simultaneously the same and different. Amara saw the problem in the atrium immediately. She pointed to it and spoke for 3 minutes without stopping, the words coming with the fluency of someone completely in their element, and when she finished she looked up and found Julian watching her with an expression she did not have an immediate category for. "Yes," he said quietly, "that is exactly it. I have been trying to say that to 3 different people for 2 months, and none of them heard it." The coffee he had fumblingly requested happened at a small place 2 streets from the atelier, where the espresso was serious and the tables were close enough together to require consideration of your voice. What was meant to be 45 minutes became 2 hours and 20 minutes. Neither of them looked at their phones. Julian was from Bogota originally, educated in Madrid and in London, where he had done his postgraduate work at the Bartlett and stayed because, he said, London was the only city he had found where architectural ambition and historical texture existed in productive argument with each other, rather than one simply overriding the other. His mother had been an interior architect in Colombia, he told her. She had been, by any objective measure, one of the most talented spatial thinkers of her generation in that country. She had also spent the first 15 years of her career being asked by male clients whether her husband was available to discuss the structural requirements. "She taught me 2 things," Julian said, "how to read a space, and how to recognize talent that is not being given its full room." He met Amara's eyes across the small table. "I recognize it without difficulty when I encounter it. I have spent enough time in spaces designed by people who are merely technically accomplished to understand the difference between skill and vision. Amara looked at this man who had visited 6 of her projects before requesting a meeting, who had read her material sample wall like a musical score, who spoke about his mother's professional injustices with the quiet anger of someone who had been paying close attention for a long time. "You're very direct," she said. "I find indirection wastes time that could be spent more usefully," he said, "though I am aware it is not always welcome." "It's welcome," she said. Walking back to the atelier, the June air warm and the street busy with the particular afternoon energy of a city that has remembered the sun, Julian paused at her door. "I would like to see you again," he said, "not only about the project." He said it plainly, without performance, the way someone states something they are certain of. "I realize that is forward. I am choosing to be forward rather than to be subtle about something I am not actually ambivalent about." Amara stood in the doorway of her atelier and looked at this man who had chosen to be clear, and felt something move in her chest that she had not felt in a very long time. Not the complicated, effortful warmth of trying to reach someone who was not reaching back. Something simpler and more immediate than that. Something that felt, against all her recent experience, like recognition. "Thursday evening," she said. "I finish at 7. The smile that crossed Julian's face was the smile of a man who has said the true thing and had it received. "I'll be outside at 7, he said, and left. Deja materialized from behind a shelving unit approximately 4 seconds later. "I was not listening," she said. "You were absolutely listening," Amara said. "He came back tomorrow with coffee for the whole studio," Deja said, already moving toward her desk with the energy of someone who has correctly predicted a weather pattern. "I'm just saying, that's the kind of man who—" "Deja, I'm going." She went. Amara stood in her atelier and touched the edge of the material sample wall with one hand and allowed herself, carefully and with full awareness of what she was doing, to feel the small warm certainty that had arrived in her chest and showed no indication of leaving. Julian courted her with the focused attention of a man who had decided something and was following through on it with the same deliberateness he brought to everything else. Flowers arrived at the atelier on days when there was no professional occasion for them, but the flowers were not generic. They were chosen, always, with specific reference to something she had mentioned. She had said once, in passing, that white ranunculus were her favorite flower because they managed to be both architectural and soft at the same time. The following Thursday, there were white ranunculus on her desk when she arrived. He texted her photographs of things he encountered in the city that he thought she would find interesting. A doorway in Shoreditch, with an unusual proportional relationship between its elements. A color combination on the side of a building in Hackney that looked like it should not work and emphatically did. A page from a book he was reading. A passage about how light behaves differently in high-latitude cities. With a note underneath that said simply, "This made me think of your comment about the Ashworth morning room." He paid attention. This was what it came down to. He paid complete, unglamorous, consistent attention to what she said and how she said it and what it meant beneath the surface, and he reflected it back to her in ways that told her he had heard not just the words, but the person behind them. She had forgotten what this felt like. Not the romance of it, though the romance was present and real, the deeper thing. The feeling of being genuinely perceived by another person, of existing fully in someone else's awareness. After a lifetime of being loved by Dominic in a way that had required her to keep narrowing herself to fit the available space, being seen by Julian felt almost overwhelming. There were moments in the early weeks when she had to remind herself to simply receive it, not to deflect, not to minimize, to simply let it land. They were 6 weeks into something that was understood between them, without having been formally defined, when Julian invited her to his apartment for dinner. The apartment was in a converted Victorian warehouse in Bermondsey, and it told her more about him in 5 minutes than weeks of conversation could have. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves along 2 walls, the books in 4 languages, and organized with an idiosyncratic logic she immediately wanted to understand. Wide timber floors, darkened with age. A kitchen that had been designed by someone who actually cooked in it, with the particular arrangement of a serious workspace rather than a showroom. And on one wall, pinned in overlapping layers, drawings and sketches, and reference photographs that covered the entire surface in a visual language so dense and so alive that Amara walked toward it and stood in front of it for a full minute without speaking. "That wall is embarrassing," Julian said from the kitchen, where he was doing something with a knife and a board, "but I find I can't take it down. I think I need to see all the thinking at once." "Don't ever take it down," Amara said. He had cooked. Not as performance, not as a demonstration of versatility, but as the genuine act of a person who wanted to feed someone they cared about. There was a lamb dish that had been cooking since the afternoon. Bread he had made that morning. Wine he had chosen, with the same specific attention he brought to everything else. A Rioja from a small producer in a region his family had lived near when he was young. They ate and talked with the ease of people who have discovered that conversation with each other is its own form of pleasure, something to be extended rather than brought to a conclusion. He told her about a project in Medellin he had visited the previous year, a community library built on a hillside that had changed the social geography of the neighborhood, with nothing more than a beautiful space in an unexpected place. She told him about a commission she had done early in the business, a bedsit in Hackney for a single mother who had saved for 3 years to afford it, which had been the smallest space she had ever worked in, and which she was more proud of than anything that had come since. He listened to this the way he listened to everything she said, fully, without waiting for his own turn. After dinner he took her to his studio, the smaller room off the main space where the Southwark drawings lived. He moved aside a stack of elevations and opened a wide, flat drawer and withdrew the atrium drawings. "I have been revising this since our conversation," he said, spreading the sheets across the table. "I think you were right about the arrival quality. I have been trying to introduce it structurally, but I think the problem is actually material. What do you think about this?" He pointed to a section through the atrium's east wall. Amara bent over the drawing. The lamp above the table cast a warm, focused light. Julian stood close beside her, looking at the same drawing, and she was aware of his presence with a peripheral attention that was entirely separate from the architectural problem in front of her. She studied the section for a long time. Then she reached across the table and picked up a pencil, one of his, and made 3 quick marks on the drawing, annotations rather than alterations, indicating where the material boundary needed to shift. "Here," she said, "if you move the material change to this line, the wall stops being a surface and becomes a threshold. The body understands thresholds before the mind does. That's what arrival feels like. A threshold your whole self crosses, not just your eyes." Julian was quiet. She looked up and found him watching her with the expression she had seen before, the one she still did not have a perfect category for, though she was beginning to understand it better. "Amara," he said. Something in the way he said her name stopped her from speaking. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I have been trying to decide how to say it without it sounding like a speech, and I've concluded that there is no version of this that doesn't sound like a speech, so I am simply going to say it plainly and hope that plainness reads as sincerity." She waited. "I am in love with you," he said it with the quiet certainty of a man stating a fact he has verified. "I know we have known each other for 6 weeks. I know you are recently out of a marriage that cost you a great deal. I am not asking you to make any decision or any commitment. I am simply telling you the truth because I find I cannot be in a room with you and not say the true thing." He paused. "You are the most extraordinary person I have encountered in a very long time. Not because of the work, though the work is remarkable. Because of who you are when you do it. Because of the way you think. Because of the specific quality of your attention when you are present in something. Because you are, entirely and without apparent effort, completely yourself." Another pause. "I find that almost unbearably attractive." Amara looked at this man in the warm lamplight of his studio, with her own pencil mark still fresh on his drawing, and felt something move through her chest that was large enough to be frightening and clear enough to be trusted. "I love you too," she said. "I am afraid of it, and I am choosing it anyway." His face did something that was not quite a smile, that was something quieter and deeper than a smile, the expression of a man who has hoped for a specific thing and found it present. When he kissed her, it was not urgent. It was the kiss of someone who believes they have time, who is not trying to consume a moment but to inhabit it fully. She felt the steadiness in him, the particular solidity of a person who is entirely present, and she allowed herself to lean into it in the way you lean into something you trust to hold. She had not been held like this in longer than she could calculate, not physically. in every sense. She had not been held with this quality of complete, unhurried attention. She felt it move through her like warmth entering a cold room. That night, as the city moved quietly outside the warehouse windows and the lamp burned low over his drawings, Amara understood with full clarity the difference between what she had survived and what she had just found. Not the difference between a bad man and a good one. The difference between a love that had asked her to diminish herself in order to sustain it, and a love that expanded the room around her simply by being present. She had been loved before, but she had not, until this moment, been chosen. Not like this. Not by someone who had looked at the full size of her, the ambition and the independence, and the specific, brilliant, demanding quality of her attention, and moved toward it rather than away. Outside, London carried on as it always did, indifferent and magnificent, and Amara Solis, in the warm lamplight of a Bermondsey warehouse, let herself be found. The wedding was on a Saturday in late September in the Cotswolds. Amara had designed every element of it herself, not because she needed to control it, but because designing spaces was the language she was most fluent in, and she wanted this day to speak as clearly and as truly as anything she had ever created. She held the ceremony at a country estate outside Burford, a Georgian property with honey-colored stone walls and gardens that in late September held the particular bittersweet beauty of a summer in its last days. She had spent 3 weekends there in the months of planning, walking the spaces in different light at different times of day, understanding what the gardens offered and how to let them speak rather than speaking over them. Late roses along the stone walls, dahlias in rust and amber cutting through the green, long tables for the reception, set under a canopy of climbing white flowers that moved in the afternoon air, candles everywhere, in glass vessels that she had designed and had made by a glassblower in Somerset, each one slightly irregular in the way that handmade things are irregular, carrying the evidence of their own making. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever designed. She knew it without vanity, the way you know something you have given everything to. She dressed in a room at the top of the house with Deja beside her, who was crying before Amara had finished her coffee and had not stopped since, in the cheerful, unapologetic way of someone who regards weeping at a wedding as a professional obligation. The gown was ivory silk, architectural at the shoulder and fluid from the waist, made in collaboration with a British Ghanaian couturier who had understood immediately what Amara was trying to achieve and had pushed it further than Amara had imagined. It moved when she moved in a way that suggested intention, as though the dress itself had been designed to describe a woman in motion rather than a woman on display. She looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was someone she recognized completely. Not the version of herself that had spent 7 years compressing into someone else's available space. The full one, the original one, the one who had known, even in the darkest period of her marriage, that she was still somewhere inside the diminished shape she had been asked to maintain. "You look," Deja said, and then stopped and pressed her fingers to her mouth and started again. "You look like yourself, fully, like the most yourself you have ever looked." "That's what I wanted," Amara said. She walked down through the house and out through the stone archway into the garden, where 60 people she had chosen were seated in the warm afternoon light, and the string quartet was playing something that felt like the inside of a feeling she did not have a name for, and at the end of the petal-covered aisle, between the rose-covered walls of a garden she had arranged to receive this specific moment, stood Julian Reyes. He was wearing a deep charcoal morning suit, and his silver-threaded hair caught the light, and he was looking at her with an expression so unguarded in its love that she felt her throat tighten. She walked toward him with the steady, unhurried gait of a woman who is certain of every step, and when she reached him and he took her hands, she felt the warmth of him move up through her palms and into her chest, and settle there with the quality of something that belongs. "You're here," he said quietly, not as a greeting, as a statement of wonder. "I'm here," she said. "The vows." Julian spoke first in his measured, accented voice that carried clearly across the garden. "Amara, I visited 6 spaces that you had created before I found the courage to ask to meet you. I walked through rooms you had made, and I thought, whoever sees the world this way, Whoever understands beauty with this specific quality of intelligence and feeling, I need to know her." He paused. "I walked in looking for a professional collaborator. I found the person I want to build every remaining thing with." He turned her hands over gently in his, looking at them. "You taught me that the most extraordinary things do not announce themselves. They wait for someone with enough attention and enough patience to recognize what is in front of them. I promise you that I will pay that attention every day. I promise that I will see you, all of you. The ambition and the independence and the specific, brilliant, demanding way you move through the world. I will never ask you to make yourself smaller, only ever more completely yourself." Amara felt tears move down her face and did not try to stop them. She began her own vows, and her voice was steady for the first 2 sentences, and then became something rawer and truer. "You came into my life when I was in the middle of remembering who I was," she said. "When I had spent so long arranging myself to fit inside someone else's story that I had almost forgotten the dimensions of my own." She looked at him. "You never asked me to be smaller. You asked me to be more. You looked at the full size of me and moved toward it. And that changed something in me that I don't think can be changed back." She paused. "I spent years believing that love was something I had to earn, something I had to maintain through constant, careful effort. You showed me that real love does not ask for your diminishment. It asks only for your presence, for the truest, most complete version of yourself, showing up." Her voice steadied. "I promise to give you that, every day, fully, without apology." When they were pronounced married and Julian kissed her, a sound moved through the garden that was not applause exactly, but the human sound of 60 people releasing something they had been holding, and the late September light came low and golden through the roses, and Deja was crying so completely that Mrs. Calloway had put an arm around her and was patting her shoulder with the serene authority of someone who has attended a great many events and knows quality when she sees it. The reception moved through the golden hour and into the blue evening with the ease of a well-designed space that has anticipated every need. There was food and music and the particular warmth of a gathering where people are genuinely glad to be present rather than performing gladness. Amara moved through the evening, held loosely by Julian's presence, near enough that she could feel the warmth of him, but not so close that the evening ceased to be hers to move through freely. This was, she thought, exactly right. This was what she had not known to ask for. Not a love that required her to orbit it, but one that allowed her to move freely in her own atmosphere while remaining in constellation with his. It was during the last hour of the reception, when the garden had gone fully dark and the candles in their handmade glass vessels cast their irregular light across the long tables, that Amara saw the figure at the garden gate. She recognized the silhouette immediately, the particular upright posture of a man who had spent his entire adult life cultivating the appearance of certainty. Dominic was standing at the iron gate at the far end of the garden. He was not inside it. He was simply standing at its edge, in the blue dark beyond the candlelight, looking in. She watched him for a moment. Then she excused herself quietly and walked the length of the garden toward the gate, and Julian watched her go and said nothing, which was the right thing. She stopped on her side of the gate and looked at her former husband. He was wearing a dark coat, and he looked, she thought, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with the light, not smaller physically, but as though something internal had settled the way structures settle when they have been under a pressure they were not built to carry. "Amara," he said, "you shouldn't be here, Dominic." "I know." He looked at her steadily. "I know. He stopped, looked at the garden beyond her shoulder. "I needed to see." She waited. "Petra and I ended 4 months ago," he said. "She told me I was never really present, that even when I was in the room I was somewhere else." A sound left him that was not quite a laugh. She said she felt like she was in a relationship with a man who was always looking just past her, at something he couldn't quite find. He paused. "I thought about that for a long time. I've been thinking about it ever since." "What did you conclude?" Amara asked. He was quiet for a moment. "I concluded that she was right, and that it had always been true. That I spent years with you, being present in every logistical sense, and absent in every sense that actually mattered. And I told myself the distance was work, or stress, or the particular isolation of building something large. He looked at her directly. It wasn't any of those things. It was cowardice, the specific cowardice of a man who has something extraordinary and is too threatened by it to do the work of deserving it. Amara looked at her former husband in the candlelight that did not quite reach him and felt, with complete clarity, that she was on the right side of this gate. I spent 2 years wondering what was wrong with me, she said. Her voice was quiet and without heat. I made myself smaller, Dominic, quieter, less. I thought if I could just remove enough of the parts of myself that seemed to be the problem, the distance between us would close. She paused. It never closed, because I was never the problem. You were never the problem, he said. I know that now. I knew it too, she said. I just needed time to stop believing otherwise. He nodded, looked at the garden again, at the candlelight, and the flowers, and the people, and the particular quality of warmth that a good space held. He's lucky, he said. No, Amara said. We are both lucky, but not in the way you mean. She looked at him with a compassion that surprised her with its completeness. You didn't lose me because you weren't enough, Dominic. You lost me because you stopped choosing me. Every day is a choice. I chose you every day for 7 years, and you chose me less and less often until one day you stopped entirely. That's not luck. That's a decision. He absorbed this without response, which was the most honest thing he had done in her presence in years. I hope you find your way to yourself, she said. I genuinely mean that. Not for my sake. For yours. Because the man I fell in love with 8 years ago at that gallery was someone worth being. I hope you find your way back to him. She looked at him for a last moment. Then she turned and walked back through the garden toward the candlelight and the music and the people she had chosen, and she felt the last seam of her old life close behind her with the quiet finality of a well-fitted door. Julian found her within moments, his hand settling at the small of her back with the ease of someone who already knows where he belongs. He did not ask questions. He simply stood beside her and looked at the garden they had made together and waited. Everything is exactly as it should be, she said. He turned to look at her face, and whatever he saw there made him smile with the fullness of a man who has found the thing he was looking for. They danced the last dance of the evening under the canopy of white flowers, the candles burning low in their handmade vessels, the garden quiet now with the particular intimacy of a late hour, and Amara rested her cheek against Julian's shoulder and felt the solid warmth of him and thought about nothing in particular, which was, she realized, the most profound form of peace she had encountered in years. Later, much later, when the guests had gone and the caterers had moved quietly through the clearing and the candles were almost done, Amara and Julian stood on the terrace of the house and looked out over the dark garden where their wedding had happened. Any part of tonight you would change? He asked. She considered this with genuine attention, the way she considered spaces, looking for the thing that was not quite right, the element that was doing less than it could. Nothing, she said. Every single thing was exactly what it needed to be. He pulled her closer. She looked up at the sky above the Cotswolds, where the stars were visible in a way they never were in London, clear and multiple and very far away, and she thought about how far she had come from the woman sitting in a leather chair in a paneled office, holding a folded receipt, listening to a clock tick. She had been compressed into a shape too small for her. She had been lied to by the person she had trusted most completely. She had sat in the ruins of 7 years, and chosen, against every easier option, to rebuild herself from the ground up rather than to rebuild around the absence. And here she was, in a garden she had designed, in a dress she had imagined, beside a man who had found her, by walking through the room she had made and recognizing, from the evidence of her own vision, that she was someone worth crossing the city for. She thought about what she had told Mrs. Calloway in the studio that morning, months ago. Every space has a personality. My job is simply to help it speak. She had spent years in a space that had been slowly silencing her. Now she was in the open air, and she was done being quiet. She tilted her face up toward the stars and breathed in the night air and felt, in the deepest and most unshakable part of herself, the particular satisfaction of a woman who knows exactly who she is and has chosen, with full awareness and no apology, to take up all the room she deserves. This is how a queen reclaims her crown, not through revenge, not through performance, simply by refusing, one clear morning, to accept a life that was too small for the size of who she actually was. And never, from that morning forward, accepting anything less.